Devastation Evokers use the powers of the red and blue dragonflights to devastate their enemies and cause chaos across the battlefield with the power of flames. So, how are we going to play it in TheWarWithin Season 1? We're going to jump straight in with the stats. I'm going to show you today everything you need to know, and that is going to be really beginner friendly if you're new to WoW, the class or the spec, while also giving you everything you need to know if you're a veteran. So our main priority stat is intellect. We're going to get this by getting a higher and higher eye level or item level of gear. And this is actually going to increase the damage done by our spells. We do have a secondary stat priority, which should be loosely followed, and that is what I would follow here. Now, what do these secondary stats do? We have versatility. When you get this stat on your gear, we do more damage, we do more healing, but we also take less damage. It's a really great all-round stat. Mastery is actually unique to every single spec, and ours as a Devastation Evoker is a giant killer. Increases the damage of your spells by X amount percentage based on the current health of your target. Higher health targets take more damage. We have haste, increasing the attack speed and spell casting speed of our spells. For example, with Living Flame here, the more haste we have, the quicker I can actually cast this spell, and any dots or damage over time spells on our enemies will actually tick their damage faster and faster. We have Critical Strike, which of course is going to give us a chance to do more damage. Now we can look at our... In fact, before I move on to the set bonus, again, I just want to reiterate that basically, if you are new, etc., or even if you're not new, just concentrate on getting a higher and higher eye level of gear and you're going to be fine. That's really all you need to focus on to start with in this season. Looking at the tier set, 2 set, Disintegrate damage is increased by 10% and Pyre damage is increased by 10%. So just 2 of our core spells in our rotation, it's increasing our. The 4 set, Eternity Surge cooldown is decreased by 5 seconds and it now grants Essence Burst. Essence Burst is something I'm going to be talking about in quite a lot of detail shortly in the rotation section of this video. And so is Eternity Surge, so we're going to go all over that soon. But that is the set bonus we're getting in Season 1. So now we're going to be looking at some of the utilities and cooldowns and defensives that we have available to us as an Evoker in TheWarWithin. So on the left here, this action bar, these are abilities that we're using to debilitate our enemies. And on the right, these ones are actually there to enhance us and our allies. So let's start off with what we're doing to our enemies then. Well, first up, we've got Sleepwalk. You can see how I'm casting this. Disorienting an enemy for 20 seconds, causing them to sleepwalk around you. And damage has a chance, so it's not a guarantee, to also awake them. Then we have Landslide. You can see I can point this wherever I want, making a landslide, conjuring a path of shifting stone towards the target location. Rooting enemies for 15 seconds that are caught with it, but damage again may cancel the root. Then we have Oppressing Roar. Any enemies caught in the cone that is emitted from the suppressing roar will actually have the duration of any crowd control placed upon them increased by 50%. So if you root them for 10 seconds and then use that, they're then going to be rooted for another 5 seconds, therefore 15 seconds, for example. And it will be for any crowd control applied to them in the next 10 seconds when you use Oppressing Roar. And lastly, we have Quell. This is your interrupt, otherwise known as a kick. And this is what we use to interrupt our enemies' spellcasting. It is extremely important to use this, and beginners and veterans alike often do overlook the importance of interrupting the enemy's spellcasting, whether that be in raiding, PvP, or Mythic Plus. Moving over then to the defensives and utilities we have to help us and our allies, we have Obsidian Scales. And you can see here I've got 2 charges of this at the moment. Reinforce your scales, reducing damage taken by 30% for 12 seconds. That's just a core defensive that we have. We then have Blessing of the Bronze. You should put this on before combat. It can be placed on you, your party, and your raid. And by that, I do mean that if you place it on yourself or just press the button, when you're in a party or a raid, it will also apply to everybody in that group. And what this does is, it reduces the cooldown of any major movement abilities that your allies and you have by 15% for an entire hour. We then have another huge one, Fury of the Aspects. This is your Bloodlust or Heroism. Basically, This is going to increase the haste of all party and raid members by 30% for 40 seconds and is generally considered the biggest cooldown in the game. Other classes also have it, and you can see I now have the exhaustion debuff. Now, if a mage uses their version or a shaman uses their version, it does then mean that everyone has the debuff and you can't then use yours. It is shared between the entire raid group. We have rescue, which I kind of can show you, but not really. You swoop to an ally and fly with them to a target location. So I can say this is where I want to fly to, and I click my ally or their raid frame, and I will rescue them to that location, taking them out of wherever, whatever they're in. And lastly, we have Cauterizing Flame. This is one of the best debuff removers in the game. You're going to cauterize an ally's wounds, removing any bleed, poison, curse, and disease effects, and healing them if it removes any effect. A lot of classes can remove like magic and disease, etc., but only very few can actually remove bleed effects. And this is why the Evoker is so amazing with their Cauterizing Flame. Now, you can choose other talents in your Evoker tree, and there are other bits and bobs in the Evoker spellbook, like Expunge, or I don't know, there's a few others that you can look through. But I don't want to overwhelm you in this video. And these are the main ones that I think you really need to be aware of if you weren't already. Now let's look at the actual rotation we're going to be using, the PvP talents, etc. Speaking of talents, we are going to be going with Scale Commander as the hero talents, and I will be taking you through those fully shortly. For the actual damage we're going to be doing, we can kind of use it in this order. So we have a resource called Essence as a Evoker, and sometimes we are actually going to get something here called Essence Burst, basically meaning that our next spell will cost no essence. We actually have a Ruby and an Azure Essence Burst. Azure Strike has a chance to make your Essence Burst, making your next Disintegrate or Pyre cost no essence. And Ruby Essence Burst, your Living Flame has a chance to make your next cause an Essence Burst, making your next Disintegrate or Pyre, again, cost none. They don't put it into two different talents in the other specs. I don't know why they do for Devastation. It's kind of annoying in my opinion. But anyway. So the first thing we can use is Landslide. As you can see, it pushes forth that landslide, rooting anyone in that path. We can then use Eternity Surge, which is our first Empower spell. Notice on the tooltip it says that at number 1 it's 2 enemies, at 2 it's 4, and at 3 it's 6. Well, if I click it, you can see it's powering up 1, 2, and 3. So depending on how many enemies you have is depending on how many you're going to use it on there. Now you can see we've procced an Essence Burst up here. Your next Disintegrate or Pyre costs no essence. So this is Disintegrate here. It's a channeled spell. Usually that would cost 3 essence, but with Essence Burst, it won't cost anything. We can also get something here called Burnout, where your next Living Flames cast time is reduced completely. That's your proc on here. So you can see it's instant. Otherwise, it's not instant. And Living Flame is one of the spells that will actually proc an Essence Burst, as you can see here. The one I didn't mention in between here is Shattering Star. This will also generate Essence Burst. Exhale bolts of concentrated power from your mouth at 2 enemies for spell frost damage that cracks the target's defenses, increasing the damage they take from you for a few seconds. And that's why we then go in with our Essence Burst spell like Disintegrate. We're also then going to use Fire Breath, doing more damage per Empower, basically just shoving in a cone in front of us a huge amount of fire damage. And what Fire Breath will also do is give us Leaping Flames, where your Fire Breath causes your next Living Flame to actually strike additional targets per Empower level. So if we use it at 1, 2, or 3, our next Living Flame will do damage to more targets. So rather than one target, you'll see here, it will actually hit multiple targets because we used our Fire Breath, whereas now it's going to only hit one target. If I then use Fire Breath at, say, Empower 2, and then use Living Flame, it'll hit 2 targets, and you can kind of see it there. We can also use Verdant Embrace either as a self-heal or to heal somebody else. Generally, I like to use it on myself as a Deva Evoker, just as a really quick heal. Living Flame, of course, is our kind of filler spell that we can use. We have Deep Breath as well, flying across the battlefield here, spewing molten volcanic damage. I always get stuck behind these when I do this. And that will remove all root effects on you. And then again, just use any essence we have on Disintegrate. It doesn't have a cooldown. So we're using it here when we have an essence burst. Use it here, pretty much just to spend your essence. And if you're on the move, we can use Azure Strike as it is instant cast there. We also have Tip the Scales. On a cooldown, compress time to make your next empowered spell instantly at maximum power. So we can use Fire Breath instantly, and it's going to then actually do it at max in power, even though it's instant. We've got Fear of the Aspects, which is, of course, our Bloodlust. And then looking at the defensives and kind of utilities we have, we've got Obsidian Scales, reducing damage taken massively for 12 seconds. We've got Renewing Blaze. The Flames of Life surround you while this is active. All of your damage that you receive is actually healed back to you over a few seconds. Hover will make you hover and increase your movement speed. Cauterizing Flame on a minute cooldown means that you're going to remove all bleed, poison, curse, and disease effects from an ally or yourself. It's on a minute cooldown, but it is the best spell in the game. Then we have Expunge, a slightly less potent version of that one, just removing poison effects. Sleepwalk will disorient your enemy for 20 seconds. We've got Time Spiral, allowing you and your enemies to cast their major movement ability once in the next 10 seconds. For us, that would then be Hover. That can be used after Time Spiral, even if something like Hover is on cooldown. Then we've got Oppressing Roar and Quell. Quell is your interrupt, whereas Oppressing Roar will actually increase the duration of movement impairing effects on your enemies. And lastly, before the gates open, use Blessing of the Bronze on your allies, reducing the cooldown of their major movement abilities by 15%, and that will last an entire hour. For the PvP talents, Unburdened Flight is a fantastic one, where Hover makes you immune to any movement speed reduction, so you can get around a lot quicker. And Nullifying Sound is a new ability we get from PvP talents. Wreath yourself in arcane energy, preventing the next 3 full loss of control effects against you. So they're completely prevented. Your enemy will waste them. And another one of my favourites for PvP talents, as we can choose 3, is going to be Obsidian Metal. While Obsidian Scales is active, you actually will be immune to any interrupts, silence, and also pushback effects. And that's from this one there. We remember it's on 1.5 minute recharge. We've got 2 stacks of that, and it reinforces your scales, reducing damage taken. Now let's have a look at the hero talents. So for this build, we are going with the Scale Commander hero talents. Now, these are available to both Devastation and also Augmentation. Let's have a look then. So, Scale Commanders are natural-born leaders capable of inspiring those around them to become better. They are chosen generals of the Drakfir and use the Empower spells to send battle commands and summon troops. So we start off with Mass Disintegrate. Empower spells cause your next Disintegrate to strike up to 3 targets. When striking less than 3 targets, its damage is increased for each missing one. Okay, so passive increase there. Going down the left side, you have Might of the Black Dragonflight. Black spells do more damage. Melt Armor, Deep Breath cause enemies to take more damage from bombardments and essence abilities. Cool. First choice node, Menacing Presence. Knocking enemies up or backwards reduces their damage done to you. Interesting there. I think this would be good in Mythic Plus, PvP, very specific situations. Otherwise, we just have Hardened Scales, which is what I would, being lazy, go for in most situations, where your Obsidian Scales cooldown just reduces more damage taken. And I think this is a lot easier to use, you know, in the moment when you need that damage reduction. Going through the middle, we've got Bombardments. Mass Disintegrate marks your primary target for destruction for the next 10 seconds. You and your allies have a chance to trigger a bombardment when attacking, dealing volcanic damage split amongst all nearby enemies. And again, from this talent here, I just want to remind you from Melt Armor, Deep Breath causes enemies to take more damage from bombardments and essence abilities. We've got Wing Leader. Bombardments reduce the cooldown of Deep Breath for each target struck. Another choice node, Extended Battle. Essence abilities extend bombardments, or bombardments have a chance to generate essence burst. Now, I think Extended Battle is better because it kind of will actually affect everyone, especially if you're Augmentation. It's a support class. You know, Devastation, basically, do you want to be selfish or selfless? Diverted Power is going to help you specifically. Extended Battle, I do think, will overall do more damage because it's helping you and your allies. Onslaught, entering combat grants a chance of burnout, a charge of burnout. causing your next living flame to cast instantly. Lovely. For each second you're in combat, Azure Strike, Living Flame, and Disintegrate deal more damage. And then we've got our last node choice, Slipstream, where Deep Breath resets the cooldown of Hover, or while hovering, damage taken from area of effect attacks is reduced. I like Slipstream because I like getting my movement speed cooldowns off cooldown as quick as possible for when I next need to use them, and that's why I like Slipstream. Lastly, we have Maneuverability. Deep Breath can now be steered in your desired direction, which I love. And in addition to that, Deep Breath burns targets for X amount of volcanic damage over 12 seconds. They're really quite straightforward talents on Scale Commander, really just kind of enhancing our support. And Bombardments is a nice little addition, adding DPS to us and our allies passively. Finally, looking at the consumables we're going to be using, you will notice these Nerubian Gem Weavers. First off, looking at enchants and what we're adding to our gear. So these are the new weekly vault items where you can add a socket to your gear on the head, wrist, and waist. And you'll also see Magnificent Jeweler's settings. You can add 2 to your neck and each ring, and this is adding 2 sockets to each piece of jewelry. Chant of Winged Grace on the back is going to be an avoidance and lessening of fall damage enchant. Crystalline Radiance will be primary stat. Avoidance on the wrist. Sunset Spellthread gives primary stat and also stamina on the legs. Scout's March is the movement speed on the boots that you'd come to expect. Putting Mastery on the rings, you can put haste or crit depending on your exact circumstances with your secondary stats and stat priority, especially if you're simulating your character, but generally, Mastery, etc. is going to be fine. And then the Authority of Radiant Power is going to be on your weapon enchant. Basically, sometimes when you're doing damage, you will do an extra amount of radiant damage on your target and also increase your secondary stat by about 1700 for I don't know how long. It just says temporarily on the tooltip of the enchant. But there we go. So sorry about that. Actually, haven't got a bloody clue. And then on the consumables, I would just go for the Tempered Versatility personally over the Mastery Flask. It's just a more general increase on both damage and defensives. Feasts, obviously, are the best option. And then Tempered Potion will increase your secondary stats. Specifically, it's going to increase the one that isn't being used on your flask. Healing Potion is your healing potion. Mana Oil can add crit and haste. I would go with the Algari Mana Oil. That's what adds crit and haste. Crystallized Augment Rune increases primary stat. And then the gems are a bit interesting. Culminating Blasphemite. It actually adds primary stat, but it also will add a little bit of critical effect per different coloured gem you're using. So if you use, like here, an Onyx, a Ruby, an Emerald, and a Sapphire, you'll get 0.60% critical effect, whereas if you only use one colour, you only get 15. So you do want to use all 4 colours, and then after that, use whichever colours you would like, depending on your stat priority. Thank you so much for watching this guide. I hope it was really useful for you in The War Within Season 1, whether it was for Mythic Plus or raiding. If you do have any questions, I'll be happy to help. My Patreon is in the description below, and that is where you can find my LVUI profiles, which I'll show you in a second. And also, I'm putting together a huge macro list for every single spec that's going to be really useful for you in The War Within as well. I am doing all classes and specs for The War Within, so if you are new to the channel, then please do click this playlist here to check out what else I have, which is all of them. There will also be PvP guides on this channel as well for War Within Season 1, so make sure to look out for that. This here is the UI that I was referring to. As you can see, we've got target frames, etc., left and right, and raid frames go in the middle here, and then weak auras in the middle with an action bar down here. Chat is behind where my camera is. Minimap and details, etc., are here on the right. All of the Plater profiles, the Voodoo, the LVUI, etc., details profile has all been made by me. And again, you can get this on my Patreon should you like it.